Today we're going to be discussing something that's become a silent hell for thousands of people in Japan each year. Stalking in Japan has become a growing problem that unfortunately isn't helped much by the flawed laws put in place that barely offer the victims any protection. More and more victims of stalking in Japan end up murdered since they couldn't get the protection they needed in time, and with that being said, not everyone on this list survived. I want to start things off by telling you the story of Sharon Flaherty. In the early 2000s, the 26-year-old from the UK landed a job with Japan's well-known JET language exchange teaching program that had her move to a small town known as Aoya. Things were going well until about a year into her stay. Sharon returned home one night and noticed a letter was being dropped into her door's letterbox mere seconds after she closed the door. This was of course strange because the postal service didn't deliver mail that late into the day. The letter was in Japanese, but when translated read, "Hello Sharon, how are you? I'm a 37-year-old man living in Aoya. I'm not married, but don't get me wrong, I'm not afraid of commitment. I think you are very smart, interesting, and sexy. I know Japanese is hard for you to understand, but please meet me for a date. Please post your reply in the mailbox outside your house. P.S. I will check the mailbox every day for your response." Of course, this letter did put Sharon on edge, which prompted her to contact the police. A second letter soon arrived, and then a third one which was much more menacing. It read, "Do you like tea or coffee? If I'm 10 minutes late for our date, will that be acceptable? Are you lonely? Do you cry when you're at your house alone? Do you prefer sex with English men or Japanese men?" Following this letter, Sharon decided to stay with a fellow JET employee who lived some 20 miles away from Aoya until things seemed to die down a few weeks later. On her way back home, Sharon was confronted by her stalker in the parking lot. Sharon has said, "As I approached, I saw a figure hiding between parked cars watching my house. My heart leapt into my mouth and the sick feeling in my stomach returned. Was it him? When I came back around, he had gone and I breathed a sigh of relief as I stopped the car. And then, out of nowhere, he appeared beside me at the driver's side and tried to open the car door. I banged my hand down on the lock and caught his eye. He was short, about aged 40 and slender. But more than anything about his appearance, I was struck by his eyes. His stare was cold and his black eyes bored into me. I didn't recognize him at all. He seemed eerily calm. He was smoking a cigarette and he was only half dressed because his shirt hung open to the waist. For a second, I froze, but then he brought his fist down on the car and I snapped into action. I put my foot down and sped off, but I was blinded with fear and the car went into a skid 100 yards up the road. I lost control and it crashed into a ditch. Somehow, I think it was because of the adrenaline coursing through my veins, I managed to scramble out of the car and run to the nearest house and began hammering on the door. I was uninjured, but I could see this man quickly walking towards me. At that moment, I genuinely thought he might kill me. I cried out in absolute terror. Fortunately, some neighbors heard Sharon's screams and drove her to the headmaster's house, which she decided to move into for a few months. She offered the police a description of her stalker, but he was never identified or arrested. Sharon has since returned home to England. The victim of our second story was sadly not as fortunate as Sharon. Saya Suzuki was an 18-year-old high school student and budding actress from Western Tokyo who was murdered in 2013 by her 21-year-old ex-boyfriend Charles Ikinaga. The two had met about 2 years earlier on Facebook and dated for about a year before Saya decided to break things off. Following the breakup, Saya received threatening emails from Ikinaga, who was also caught loitering outside the girl's home on a number of occasions. He would even show up at public places where Saya spent her free time. On October 8th of 2013, Saya and her family reported this to the police, who attempted to contact Ikinaga several times by calling his cell phone, but he didn't answer and no further actions were taken. Later that same day, Saya was ambushed in her home after Ikinaga managed to hide in her closet as he awaited her return that afternoon. She was stabbed in her neck and stomach and died shortly after. While on the run, Ikinaga decided to leak nude photos of his ex-lover online in one last attempt to shame her. According to his lawyers, Ikinaga was a victim of abuse himself at the hands of his mother's boyfriend. He's since stated that he's changed and needs to spend time reflecting on his actions. This last story is arguably the most tragic and was the cause of new laws against stalking in Japan in the early 2000s. Shiori Ino was a 21-year-old Japanese university student who was murdered in October of 1999. Back in January of that year, Ino met 26-year-old Kazuhito Komatsu, and the two quickly started dating. Komatsu had lied about his identity, claiming to be a 23-year-old with ties to the real estate business when he actually ran a chain of massage parlors with his brother Takeshi. After a few dates, Komatsu became violent, often screaming at Ino for not accepting expensive gifts he presented to her. After the brief relationship ended, Komatsu began to stalk and harass Ino and her family. He had managed to call her home phone despite only being given her cell phone number, and even threatened to harm Ino's younger brother who was attending primary school at the time. The attacks continued despite attempts to get the authorities involved. The Saitama Police Department noted how the stalking was Ino's own fault for accepting expensive gifts from her ex-boyfriend. Still, Ino refused to get back together with Komatsu, and as a result, Komatsu and Takeshi eventually hired a hitman who was a former employee of the brothers' massage parlors. The hitman recruited two men to aid him in tormenting the family for the next few months until they finally carried out the murder. On the morning of October 26, 1999, Ino left for school on her bike. She was approached by one of the hitmen and stabbed to death in broad daylight. Following the girl's death, the police and media began to spread misinformation about the student, claiming that she was a prostitute who simply messed with the wrong people. The truth was kept away from the public until a journalist by the name of Kiyoshi Shimizu decided to investigate for himself. His work led to the eventual arrest of the hitman and a warrant being issued for Komatsu's arrest. Komatsu committed suicide before the authorities could track him down. So that's about it for today. As always, thank you so much for watching, and I look forward to seeing you next time.